My name is Rob, and at 45 years old, I decided to take a risk. I bought a farm and moved there with my wife and daughter. At first, it was tough. A lot of work, and my wife helped me when she could, but she already had her job, so almost everything fell on me. The farm was big and needed a lot of repairs. I woke up early, took care of the animals, fixed fences, and tried to keep everything in order. My daughter, Julia, helped when she could, but she was still adjusting to life in the countryside. My wife always supported me, even though she was tired from her own work. The days went by, and we grew closer. Miguel became a constant presence on the farm, always working hard and helping with whatever he could. I noticed he spent a lot of time near Julia, talking to her while she took care of the chickens or helped in the garden. They laughed together, and she seemed more cheerful since he arrived. I thought he might be interested in dating my daughter. After all, he was a young, single guy, and Julia was a beautiful and smart girl. I started observing more closely, trying to understand his intentions, but something about the way he acted made me question if that was really what he wanted. One day, we went out in the morning to fix a fence. The sun was scorching, and the heat seemed to cling to our skin. We worked for hours until we decided to take a break under the shade of a tree to rest and drink some water. The relief of the shade was welcome, and I felt the fatigue in my muscles as I leaned against the tree trunk. After drinking some water, I got up to pee. I didn't go far, after all, we were two men, and I didn't see the need to hide anything. While I was there, I noticed he was looking at me. It wasn't a quick or discreet glance. He was staring, not bothering to hide it. It made me uncomfortable, but I didn't say anything at the time. I went back to the shade of the tree, trying to ignore what had happened, but the feeling lingered. We finished the work and headed back. The atmosphere between us had become awkward after that moment. It felt like the air was charged, as if something could happen at any moment. We walked in silence, the sound of our footsteps on the dirt path, the only thing breaking the quiet of the afternoon. I looked ahead, trying to focus on the path, but I could feel the weight of the situation. When we got home, he said goodbye with a nod, without many words. "See you tomorrow, Rob," he said before turning and heading back to town. I stood there, watching him leave, with that strange atmosphere still hanging in the air. That night, when I least expected it, I found myself thinking about it. What did he want? Why did he look at me like that? Was he just surprised by the size, or did he like it? The questions swirled in my head, and I couldn't stop thinking about that scene. His expression, the way he didn't look away, it all seemed to have a meaning I couldn't decipher. I need to figure out why, I thought, tossing and turning in bed. The idea came almost automatically. I'll do it again to see his reaction. It wasn't something I usually thought about, but it had gotten to me in a way I couldn't ignore. Closing my eyes, I imagined how it would be, and part of me was already looking forward to the next day. Everything was going fine until I saw a broken fence. I thought, now I'll test him. I got off the horse, and he did too. Together, we fixed the fence, with him helping to stretch the wire and secure the posts. When we finished, I made sure to pretend I was going to pee, just like last time. This time, I was more attentive, watching his every move. I did the same, without hiding, and he did the same. He didn't look away. I shook it, looking directly at him to see his reaction. He didn't avert his gaze, and I asked casually, "Everything okay?" He smiled, somewhat awkwardly, but with a glint in his eyes that I hadn't seen before. "All good," he replied. "Just wondering how anyone can handle you." The way he said it, with a mischievous smile, left me unsure if he was joking or if there was something more behind those words. I smiled and said, in a playful but provocative tone, "Oh, really? Be careful with that curiosity. You might end up wanting to try it yourself." He smiled too, and that smile of his, half shy, half mischievous, left no doubt in my mind. "Who knows, right?" he replied, and in that moment I understood that he was interested. I didn't say anything, but the atmosphere between us changed. The silence that followed was charged with something we didn't need to say out loud. We got back on the horses and started heading home. The path seemed shorter, but at the same time, every second was intense. I looked ahead, but I could feel the weight of his gaze on me, as if he was waiting for me to say something, to take the initiative. When we got home, he got off the horse first and looked at me for a moment as if waiting for a reaction. I just nodded, trying to stay calm, but knowing that this wasn't going to end here. We unsaddled the horses and took them to the barn. The sun had already set, and the dim light in the barn was on, casting shadows that danced on the wooden walls. We let the horses loose, and as I closed the gate, the question suddenly popped into my head. I couldn't hold back. "Miguel," I began, trying to sound casual. "That time you said, 'Who knows, right?' What did you mean by that?" He smiled, somewhat awkwardly, but with a glint in his eyes that left no doubt. "I said that because I've been curious about it for a while," he confessed, looking at the ground and then at me. "But I've never acted on it." I felt a chill in my stomach, but also a courage I didn't expect. "How do you know if you've never tried?" I asked with a half smile. "Come here, let's test it out now." He didn't hesitate. He approached, crouching a little, and I felt his hand first, firm but gentle. Then the warmth of his mouth made me completely aroused. The barn, the silence of the night, everything seemed to disappear in that moment. It was driving me crazy. His touch was precise, as if he knew exactly what he was doing, and every movement was too good to ignore. His warm mouth enveloping me, trying to take it all in but not quite managing, only intensified the feeling. I felt every detail, from the way he breathed to the heat rising through my body. My hands gripped his shoulders, and I couldn't think of anything else but that sensation. The barn, the sound of the horses in the background, the dim light illuminating the scene, everything seemed distant, as if only the two of us existed in that moment. He tried, he struggled, and I knew he was doing his best, but that mix of inexperience and desire only made me more excited. After a while, he turned around, putting himself in a vulnerable position. That sight was driving me wild. He was there, completely exposed, trusting me, and that only intensified the moment. I started carefully, slowly, knowing it was important not to rush things. At first, I thought he wouldn't be able to handle it, that it might be too much. But with patience and calm, we managed. Every movement was calculated, every touch was deliberate to avoid scaring him. I felt his breathing quicken, his muscles tense, but I also noticed he was relaxing, giving in more with each moment. The soft sound that escaped his lips let me know we were on the right track, and that only made me more excited. He gave in, and I didn't think twice. The touch was direct, no beating around the bush, and we moved with an urgency that couldn't be hidden. It was wild, intense, as if we had waited too long for this. I felt every movement, every reaction from him, and that only made me more aroused. At the peak, everything became hotter, heavier. The heavy breathing, our bodies pressed together, the way he reacted to every touch. It was as if the world had disappeared. I knew this would change everything. But in that moment, I didn't care. We were there, completely surrendered, and nothing else mattered. I held his waist tightly, feeling every curve, every movement. He arched, and I knew we had reached the limit. The sound that escaped his lips was almost a moan, and that only made me more excited. I felt him explode with pleasure, and that took me with him. It was intense, wild, as if we had broken all barriers. For a moment, everything stopped. The heavy breathing, our bodies pressed together, the heat that seemed to envelop us. It was as if the world had disappeared. I knew this would change everything, but in that moment, I didn't care. We were there, completely surrendered, and nothing else mattered. We left the barn still dazed, trying to hide the heavy breathing and the glances that kept crossing. I looked around, making sure no one saw us while he adjusted himself, trying to appear as normal as possible. The silence between us was heavy, but at the same time, it was charged with something that didn't need to be said. He walked to his car, an old pickup truck parked near the barn. Before getting in, he looked at me for a moment as if he wanted to say something, but in the end, he just nodded. The engine started, and he drove off, the headlights cutting through the darkness of the night. I stood there, watching the car disappear down the dirt road, while my mind was still processing everything that had happened. The rumble of the engine grew fainter, and I knew this wasn't going to be forgotten anytime soon. The following week, we did it again. This time, it was much more intense. The calm of the farm, the silence broken only by the sound of the wind and the animals, created an atmosphere that seemed made for that moment. My wife had traveled with my daughter, and the feeling of being alone, without worries, only deepened the connection between us. He arrived as usual, but this time there was something different in the air. We looked at each other, and no words were needed. We knew what we wanted, and this time there was no rush. It was slower, more intentional, as if every touch, every glance, was part of something bigger. The intensity grew, and I could feel he was more confident, more relaxed. We gave ourselves completely, without fear, without hesitation. It was as if that moment belonged only to us, and nothing else mattered. If you want to hear all the details, the link is in the comments. There you'll hear every detail of the 2 times we were together. Kisses, and see you next time.